Welcome to Driven to Create, the podcast that explores the journeys of those who can't help but bring their ideas to life. Today's episode is titled Fundamentals Win Fights. The first time I heard this term, I was living in Chicago and training at a Muay Thai / kickboxing gym, and they drilled it into us ad nauseum. There's a lot that we can take away from that phrase and apply it into what we do every day, especially since nobody loves doing the boring stuff. Even the people that are better at it, they still don't love it, especially us as creatives. We want to dive into the sexy things and get as much gratification as possible. But the fundamentals are what builds a foundation for us to do it in a repeat fashion, and also it affords us more tools for our toolbox, so we can accomplish a task in a multitude of ways. I'm joined by Eric Levesque. He's an editor, a cinematographer, and a director. I've known him for the better part of 16 years, since the beginning of my career, and he has a unique perspective, and I think we had a lively conversation today. It gets a little technical, or should I say a lot technical, but if you're not a content creator or a video professional, I'd still encourage you to give it a try. Give the podcast a listen and see if you can't take away something from it. We had a lot of fun, and I hope you do too. Enjoy. Thanks for joining me, Eric. Can you start by introducing who you are and giving a little background?
Yeah, sure. My name's Eric Levesque. I am a video and film director and DP, cinematographer, whatever you want to call that. I have an editing background, so I'm still an editor as well. I met you. Where did we meet, Paul? Back at VSI? Like, where were we? God, it goes so far back. We've known each other for like 15 years. So I started working for as a kid, I wanted to be a film director. I love Steven Spielberg. I wanted to do that. So I wanted to get into the business, and I discovered editing and got into editing. And then as an editor, I was always kind of frustrated by shots that weren't there. Why didn't they get this? Or why didn't they get that? Or directors saying like, I know we shot this, but it's not there. That kind of stuff kind of drove me nuts. So I got my first camera. I got a Canon 7D back like 12 years ago or something. And kind of retrofitted an old film lens that my grandfather had. And then I just fell in love with shooting. I got a dog, and I would just film my dog and get used to that. And then I kind of just took it from there. I worked for an agency for about 5 years, and then a couple of years ago went out on my own, and I'm just doing my own thing, living the dream.
Nice, man. Yeah, we all are going for that.
We're all trying.
we met way back when, and I was just laughing as we were talking because I was thinking about when I rented Ray. We have a friend, Ray, his 3-chip prosumer camera that I shot the one and only wedding I shot.
One and done, baby. That's a overrated work right there.
Yeah. It was tough. I mean, I can't believe they paid me because it was on. God, was that? Yeah, that was Mini DV.
Yeah.
We shot that on Mini DV.
Yep.
But and it's so funny too, because I've been really pensive lately about like how much time has gone by and what has changed in the industry. And there's not, granted, I could talk to my buddies at Synthetic Cinema about like the old days, like Media 100 and all these old the proto NLE, editing systems. But like you saw me when I was a young punk, and you were a little bit more mature at that point. But I mean, that was back when the Final Cut suite was dark and nobody gave it any respect. And then I got laid off when ESPN Classic closed. I came back a year later, and you're cooking away at the Final Cut suite, and all the Avid suites, which were like thousands and thousands of dollars, were just sitting dark, plus everyone left at that point. So, but So it's crazy to see like how much has changed in the accessibility, and like we could talk about that and stuff. But you know, the fundamentals always remain the same. And you know, on some level I feel like because so much of the complexity has been abstracted away uh, from creating video, you know, anyone could do it now. If you have an iPhone, you can do it.
Right.
That oftentimes that the fundamentals aren't there with newer content creators, even if their video looks great. um you know, I can't tell you how many times so over the years that I've had interns that, you know, like they do this awesome work, and then the way you see the way that they work, and it's just like, oh my god, you know, like naming conventions are out the window.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah. So to your point though, right? If it looks good, it looks good, and who cares how you do it? Like, you know, some people will get criticized with how they hold the camera. Like, who cares? Like, if your shots are you know, lit the right way, if they're you know, framed the right way, everything else, you know, I don't care how you get it done. But you just mentioned kind of like media management, and that goes when I talked to about our friend Ray. That was like the first thing as an editor was like media management is number one. Media management. You don't want to lose your media. And it is. It's the most, in post-production, it's the most important thing. You got to make sure everything's organized for many reasons, for your own reason. You can get into a project and just kind of chip away. And sometimes, you know how it is. You get a little sloppy. If you got, this is a 1-day edit, I'll knock this out today. You might not go through and organize everything perfectly. But if your initial media management is on point, it will never be an issue, right? Like, you'll at least know that your files are stored in the right places and everything else, and you have your, however your folder structure is, you stick to that every time at the very beginning, and then if you have to cut some corners later on, at least you can fall back on that base solid structure. And that's for post. The same thing applies with production as well.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so funny too, because I'm not a organized person by any means, like naturally.
Right.
And it's almost like starting off on my own years and years ago forced me to become disciplined in the things I would otherwise, you know, like otherwise I'd have files named like final,
I know,
you know, 3.mov. But you know, like getting the naming conventions down, and even just logging footage rather than just digging in and just cutting right away without creating selects or without even labeling, you know, the footage. It's just a pain when you go back to it later and you have to make a small change, and it takes you longer to find the clip than it does to make the change, you know?
100%. And that's so frustrating, and you hate your previous self for misplacing that file. Like, you know, but think about it though. If you go back to like a client, if you do a recurring job, or you did a job a year ago and maybe you've archived your footage, and that job comes back and your client needs it in a pinch, you know, the ability to go and grab that and get it back to them within a day or two is huge. Whereas, like, I think, you know, and you can send those files a lot of times, you can transfer things fast nowadays, but I think it's just a peace of mind. I've done that in the past where I didn't archive something, or I deleted something. Oh, I'm never going to have to do this again. I deleted the project. And about a year later, they came back and they wanted to just fix it, just add a little change to it. And I had parts of it, but I essentially had to rebuild the whole thing, where it was something I could have just done in, you know, an hour or two. It took me like a whole day, you know, so it's just really kind of covering your own butt too, you know? I mean, just make it easier for yourself, be there for your clients, you know? It's just that it's the most fundamental thing is to be organized with your footage, right? Like you just have to do that.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things about fundamentals is it helps sustainability.
Yeah.
It's like, so like, let's say you have no grasp on what codecs are, and you're just converting things willy-nilly, and then when you go to upload to YouTube or whatever, the quality is like, this didn't look like this in, you know, in Premiere. You know, how sustainable is that? Or like your work methods, like if you're not naming things, there's no media management, there's, you know, like things are all over the place, they're not, you know, your footage and files aren't collected at the end. How long is it going to take for you to just start losing money or losing sleep, which it's usually sleep first and then money? Trying to find stuff where it's like, you know, like I had a client about a month ago, and they wanted something back from 2014, And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, let me pull out one of those 5 drives. And then the second I pulled out the drive, everything reconnected
Yeah.
perfectly.
Yeah.
And it's the same folder structure. And it's ridiculous because, like, you know, it's super easy, but it takes a step, you know, one step. Just don't get too excited, like, you know, before you start editing.
Yeah, man. And I mean, I had a job at one point where, you know, they had a lot of assets and a lot of projects and things, and there was just not very good media management throughout the company. So they would have a video from, you know, before I was there, and they would want to make an edit to it. And I couldn't find the project, or I couldn't find all of the footage. And it was just a nightmare. And then what you do is you end up using like the final file. And then the final deliverable was something that wasn't like full HD, right? It was like a random, you know, we wanted to do 640 by 480 because it was just going to be like a small, you know, small video thumbnail kind of thing. This is like old mentality now, right?
Yeah.
But like,
God, yeah.
you know, and then you'd end up using that little clip and like cutting out of there and blowing it up. And it's just, and then what are you doing? You know, you're just kind of Frankensteining something together, you know? So, and to that point, it's not just about you and backing up your projects. If you need help, right? If I got to hand off a project, I'm going on vacation and my client's taking forever to get me feedback, but I know they're going to need a finished product while I'm away. You want to be able to give that project to somebody else and know that they're going to have everything they have. And same thing when you get a project. Like, I'm always nervous to get projects from people because you don't know if their media management is up to snuff, right? Or if their project is organized or how they work. You know, it's like, So it's like you kind of build that trust with people. If people know they can trust you, you can give them work, take work from them. You got to think of the different workflows. Here's one, color correction, right? Color grading, right? I had a request from somebody for me to do a color grade in a project they did in Final Cut 10. Now, this is years ago. I hope it's changed since then. But Final Cut 10 could not export like a reference project. They couldn't export the... what's the word I'm looking for? The offline, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't export that. You had to take the project and you had to take all of the media. They wouldn't consolidate the media and you had to work off of that. So I declined the job because I was like, I don't have Final Cut 10. I don't want to work in it. And it was just a nightmare. So that's a technical difference, but you know, if you're going to send your footage to a colorist, you got to know how to send it the right way. There are certain standards of how things should be organized. You know, take the biggest company you work for and copy their folder structures, right? That's what I've started to do too. Like the biggest company I work for, they have like they have so many people working for them. And I'm just like one, you know, freelancer that does some work for them. And they have it all managed perfectly. So I've kind of taken their file format structure and everything else and applied it to myself because I know this works for a huge group of people. It's going to work for me and my little group of people around here too.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. Yeah, the same thing for me is like I kind of emulated how the films were doing it, especially with so many, you know, working in VFX. Like the pipeline had to be so organized when we had hundreds of VFX shots, and it was so crazy. So like I kind of just copied, you know, the VFX pipeline and then did my own little improvements for the projects that I do. So it was the same exact thing. And I mean, even back when I worked with your wife,
yeah,
you know, when I worked with your wife at that media buying firm, they you know, all the production management, I kind of just took what they had and improved on it for after I quit and I went on my own. So yeah, I mean, you know, steal from others and then make it better. Cause
I mean, if it works, right? Ain't nothing wrong with learning. We're all learning something from somebody. And if we're learning good practices and fundamentals, that's where it's at, man. That's what you got to carry on with you.
Well, you know, and I mean, like, I can't speak for you, but like when I first met you, I mean, what was it? Was it 2006 or 2007?
It's a long time ago.
And so you were in the transcription department, and you also did editing, a
little bit
for
back
ESPN.
Then. Yeah.
And then I got a job in sales because I was just coming out of the car dealership, so I was just shitty salesman at car dealerships.
I totally forgot about that.
I sold Dave Webster a car. It was like a
and he
Honda
hired
Odyssey.
you.
And then he hired me for weeks after. He was asking me for like my sales reports from the dealerships, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get them to you. And I'm like, I'm a terrible salesman. I like, why did this guy hire me? But I had one foot out of the door at the dealerships because I wanted something more.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I'd always make videos and stuff. So it was interesting to me. And then Webster realized I sucked at sales, and then he moved me to the production department, doing tape conversions.
Yep.
So when I first started learning, it was crazy because we were still doing VCR transfers.
Yeah.
And that made sense to me.
Yeah.
But there was Betacam SP, there was digital Betacam that was like the next big thing, HD cam that they had to rent
DVC
deck for.
Pro, the D5, they got crazy with that stuff.
Oh,
$90,000 tape deck. I remember that thing.
Oh, that was, I mean, what did they to rent it for a week? It was like $8,000.
It
or
was
something.
nuts.
Something stupid.
Yeah.
But when I was first learning, I had no background in video or film.
Right.
So, I was kind of like, who was Dave's partner?
Pat.
Pat was like explaining the technical stuff to me about, like 480 lines of resolution. And
that guy's a technical. So you and I are both really fortunate because we got like Pat Dell is a technical genius with this stuff. He just knew. He's a guy that knows how the TV works. You hear people ask you, I don't know how TV works. I know how to get an image on there and why it looks the way it does, but I don't know. He knows all that stuff. And we were really fortunate to work for those guys at an early point in our year and learn those kind of, and the tape formats are all obsolete now, but still the basis of those of that is the same with, like you said, like the lines, and nothing's really interlaced anymore, but like all of that stuff, the standards and conversions and the different file formats and all those technicalities, I think those go a long way right now because I think you don't need them everywhere, but every now and then you're going to get asked to deliver to like PBS, or you're going to have to deliver to a news station, and I can imagine the fright that must come over someone's face when they've got to deliver like an MXF OP1A and they're like, it's like, what is that? Fortunately though, as you know, like Media Encoder has presets for everything. So I think that's something people can fall back on now for sure. It's just use the media. If you're going to YouTube, just run it through the YouTube preset and Media Encoder, It kind of made it so easy for us in a way. Like it's so easy, but you think about dissecting some problems that people may run into, and that's where those like early lessons that we learned, I think, kind of help us dig out of a hole sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, and that really like speaks to what this episode's all about. Is like, have we abstracted away so much that why would somebody try to look up this fundamental information? I mean, like I remember the first movie that was being delivered to a network that I worked on. I had a rude awakening, adhering to their guidelines.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, it was the Chiller Network. And they're defunct now, but it's an NBC Universal one. And I was delivering like something crazy, like 80 variations of commercials. So it was like 5 main commercials, and they were cut into like coming next Thursday, tomorrow, tonight, that stuff. And they had all these guidelines. And I remember talking to Andrew. I'm like, do I have to follow these? And he's like, yeah.
To a T, baby.
And so like it was kind of a rude awakening because I had to learn really fast of reading this. And then every other network has all these crazy.
Well, you think about that too.
Different.
You get one frame where your video level is peaking over and you fail QC and you got to re-export. Then it's not like you got to like re-render the file. You got to re-export and you got to go back to tape, right? And send that thing back out. So it's not a quick fix, it never was.
Yeah, we've had a few like scares in the past where we couldn't do like a patch. We had to re-upload, 200 gigs or 150 gigs of a movie. And now it's fine because I got fiber here, and I'm not really doing any uploading of giant files anymore. But at the time, you were lucky if you had 10 download speed, and it was this is going to take a weekend.
I know.
And now it takes 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah. But it's interesting stuff. I mean, and I'll tell you what though, the one way it frustrates me, we're gonna get our frustrations right, is that like if you go like in the past, you can go to like message boards, you can go to Reddit, or you can go wherever you go for your message boards, even if you go to Adobe, Apple, whatever. I find if I'm having specific issues a lot of times, it's almost like, the old cliche, you call your computer company, and then the guy on the other line, the first thing he asks you is like, is the computer plugged in? It's like, I feel like the message boards have now become that way. And it's like, oh, what is this? What is that? And it's just like, you have to it takes you forever to find like a meaningful board because people are just like explaining the basics, and then you can't even get to the root of what the problem is. I guess that's my one problem with the lack of, I guess you see it out there, the lack of a good technical background or technical understanding of how things work, is that,
Right.
when we run into those roadmaps, because there's always going to be something, those road bumps, there's always going to be something, it's kind of harder to find a solution nowadays. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like it can be kind of tough to find the fix to something because, it's all like, are you sure it's plugged in? Are you using the right, what's your frame rate? What's this and that? It's like, you got to explain those. And honestly, it's good for people because they're probably learning through that process, right? They're learning, oh, okay, that matters, or this frame rate matters, or why does this shot look steppy or jumpy, when I combine it with these,
Don't get me started on conforming, because like, especially now where, I mean, if you throw anything in Resolve, it kind of guesses the frame interpolation. But, back in the day, you had pull down.
Well, in Avid, you had to, if you wanted to bring a 2398 video clip into, 60p or 5994 project, you had to open a new project, transcode it in that project, and then bring that project in to your 60 frame project. You know what I mean? But that's why Avid always worked well, because it forced you to do those conforms. It forced you to change your footage to match up. The best thing about Final Cut was that you didn't have to do that, but then you'd have all these, weird issues,
Yeah.
Why?
And again, like it's all been abstracted away, and like I mean, it's remarkable on like, so I primarily use Resolve. I'll still fire up Premiere now and again, but I do all my grading in Resolve, so it's just easier than round tripping things. But Resolve has transcription now. It has, you can generate subtitles, which Premiere can do as well. It has all this stuff built in. It has all these robust color grading tools, and but it's all easy now.
Yeah.
Where back in the day, especially with color management, let's say we have 4 different cameras and they're all 4 different makes and models. If you're not managing your footage, you're just fighting against yourself. But without managing your footage, you have to have the fundamentals to understand the footage and like what you're actually doing to it.
Well, and then to step back on something you just said. So like fundamentals, right, across the board, right? We're kind of focusing on post-production right now, but if you think of fundamentals, and this happens all the time, as you mentioned the tools like Adobe's Transcription, right? Now, if I always budget, if I'm producing a project, I'll always budget for transcription, right? Because granted, I feel bad. I know transcriptionists and I want to give them work. But other people don't necessarily do that because their fundamentals aren't great. Like other people in the business that maybe become producers, however they become producers or however they gain clients, like maybe they don't have a thorough background and they don't have the fundamentals to know that like when you're going to give an editor a project that you shot, you should give them transcripts. And then furthermore, you should probably highlight those transcripts with the main points that you want the editor to get into the first cut, right? Like I'm all for being an editor and having free reign. This is what the clients will say a lot of times. Oh, go at it, free reign, do whatever you want. Well, that's great and all, but you gave me 4 hours of interviews and, 300 gigabytes of B-roll, and I don't really know what the story is. So now before Adobe's transcription, you'd have to watch all of that footage. You'd have to watch or just have it typed. A lot of times I would just eat it because they wouldn't pay me as an editor to get a transcript done. So I would just like, fine, I need if I'm going to get this done in a decent amount of time, I need a transcript. I need to know what I'm looking at, right? Because to that point too, if you've got 4 hours of interviews, you don't want to go watch 4 hours of interviews. You want to read that. You want to go in and type a keyword. If we're talking about F1 cars, you want to type in F1 and find out where in the transcript they're talking about F1. You know what I mean? So those tools are fantastic to help us deal with the lack of fundamentals that many of the producers that we work with, that they lack, and it's fine. Now it's fine. 2 years ago, it was nerve-wracking, because you'd have to be like, you've said you can only pay me to edit for 2 days, but you've also given me the job of being the story. Like, I have to go through the scripts and I have to create the whole thing. I'm okay to do that, but I'm not getting paid that extra day to like just go through all, everything. It doesn't happen on its own,
Right.
So
yeah,
sorry,
we
ran over on that one
in the last episode. Yeah, no, I talked about managing, expectations and alignment of the vision. But it's 100% the truth. And the thing is that we're still early in these tools too, and they're only going to get easier. So like right now, we could generate a basic transcript from Resolve or Premiere, but we're not getting timestamps or time code every 1 minute or however long you want. Right. We don't have, like there's a lot of things that transcriptionists do that we don't have yet, and so you have to give up that functionality. And if you've never used a transcriptionist, you don't know what you're missing. So and I suspect that, because like we have a friend, Alice Burke, who's an amazing transcriptionist. And she's an OG, but it's so much easier just working from her transcripts, 100%. Especially when there's like 3 hours of interviews and it's like, oh, when did I ask this question, or when did I say this, or when did they have this response? There was something,
Yeah, I agree. It's transcript it's a fundamental part of the process. It's like the beginning of the post-production process, like a paper edit. When you work for producers at ESPN, from the beginning, they know what that is. We're editing this on paper. Someone's approving that ahead of time. So like, you think of how much time you can waste. Then you get to the edit suite. So if you're renting an edit suite at an hourly or daily rate, that's not cheap. So you better go in there knowing what you want to cut. Things have changed a little bit for us because we're editing, especially since COVID, like we're editing remotely most of the time now. Or if we're going in somewhere, they've got us for a day, or whatever. They can just kind of agree to a project rate. Whereas like if you're renting a studio space, there's a hard cost associated with that. And it's easy to get kind of stuck on the wrong side of that. If you agree to a rate and then you're asked to do so much more work, like you don't have a transcript. I'm going to harp on that again. Give us transcripts. Like you should know what the content is. If you have a client where you're really I have a few clients where I'm really intertwined with them, and I'm fine with that because I know from the beginning I was included in post-production or pre-production, and I knew what we were getting into the whole way. So like, that's fine. We shot it. We're busy. Can you just handle it? No problem. Right. I'm talking about the edits where you're just an editor and someone else has produced something. They've got to give you as much as they can. And that's a fundamental thing on their end, is to learn that you have to, give these people everything you can, and a lot of times there's not a big budget behind it. So like someone's got to do that work. So don't put it on your young editor. He's got a great rate. He's a young guy, a young woman. Don't put it on them, man. You do that work, because if you don't give them clear direction and they don't know exactly what you want, like you're going to be redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. So fundamentals.
Yeah, no, I think that's the important thing to remember, is that no junior editor or designer or whatever, no junior role person is going to have a mastery of the fundamentals. So I think it's important for the senior level, creatives to establish that foundation, because like you can't build a house without a foundation.
Right.
So if you're just saying, oh yeah, make a story, and you're not setting the boundaries for that story, it's probably going to either miss the mark, or it's going to look like a camel instead of a horse, So yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things I want to mention, is that I don't think this is like the old ways are better than the new ways, because I think the new ways are very efficient.
Yeah.
I do think, however, that there's good things that can be taken from the old ways, or even, and not even saying old ways, but just understanding the fundamentals of the process of creating, and in this case video, but also like what you're creating and how you're handling it. It's like a nice, and I hate that I make cooking metaphors every single episode so far, but it's just like, if you have a piece of Wagyu beef and you just mash it and overcook it, and it doesn't matter that it was Wagyu beef at one point, because you're serving them a shoe, but if you give it the, like the nice treatment, and you give it what the meat deserves, and a little salt and pepper, and that's it, and you treat it right, it's going to be a fantastic meal. And it's the same thing with video clips. Like, if you have this great thing, but then you're putting it through the meat grinder before it comes out, and like, you're not taking advantage of all the stuff available to you, and you don't know that exists unless you've learned it, unless you've been through it,
So or it's like you start messing around with color and getting all artsy and stuff without really knowing the foundations, and then it just doesn't look right. Like, people are gonna be like, what's up with that? It's like, I think about was it like Picasso, right? Like, if you look at Picasso's early works, right, he could replicate the Mona Lisa if you asked him to, because he got those fundamentals down. And then he was trained properly, and he knows the fundamentals of painting and lighting and shading and all of this, and then he can go and get crazy and apply it to his cubism, which is amazing. But like, he has a good fundamental background first. And you can get away with that. People can get away with that now and just go shoot and whatnot. And God, learn from YouTube. Go on, you take YouTube tutorials. We all do it. We get stuck on something. I go to YouTube. I look out how to do it. And every time I got to make an animated clock in After Effects, which is like once a year, I got to go rewatch that tutorial. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not something I do every day, but I know it can be done. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with shooting on an iPhone. Just know its limitations. Know your exposure, know your framing, know your simple things, give yourself pad in your records. There's so many little things that you have to do. The best way to learn is to live through it, right? Like, make those mistakes and live and learn through them. But I don't know, I kind of went on a tangent there again, Paul. No. This is a good forum for that.
It's so true, though. And like, we tend to overcomplicate everything, because like, and I've mentioned this in the previous episodes, but like, we get lost in the vision that we're not focusing on what we can lean on, which is our fundamentals. It's like, what do we know? And I think as technology continues to grow, I think things are going to get easier and easier, which is going to be even more important why people should focus on doing the fundamentals, because at some point, right now, we have so many gurus and stuff, and I'd say 75% of them are just liars or shysters or whatever. But the 25%, what happens when they retire, and who's passing on that knowledge? And granted, you can make the argument that there's always going to be somebody teaching someone, but knowing how to use a program and knowing why you should use the program are two totally different things.
100%. And that also goes into a little bit of like AI right now, right? Like, people are afraid of AI. I know some people are afraid of it. Some people embrace it. I'm embracing it for the most part. But I look at it this way, and it's the same thing for a younger person. Like, 'cause I think of my younger self as an editor, and I could create some shortcuts, or I could do something this way. And this goes back to where I was saying, if you hand your project off to somebody else, you want to make sure that you didn't work in your own weird, quirky way, and they're not going to be able to fix it, right? Because you learn that you need to be able to go back and edit something. If you have a difficult, I don't want to say difficult client, but a very specific client that has certain needs, and they're going to want something, right? Like, you may create this perfect thing in your mind, but they want to tweak like the littlest thing, and that little thing may be such a pain in the butt. It may affect everything before and after that point in your sequence, right? And it can just kind of derail you. But if you stick to your fundamentals, you know how to do it. Okay, take a deep breath, go back and do it, and fine tune that little tiny thing. That's where I think that the fundamentals of setting up your projects right, of knowing the way things should be done, goes to help. Because, like, for instance, if you generate an image in AI show it to a client. They love it, but they want to change little tiny things in it. It's like, okay, I can't change that with Midjourney, that specifically, not yet anyways, but I can go into Photoshop and I can edit things in Photoshop, right? So now you know Photoshop, right? So you're going to need to know how to go from one thing to the next. Your fundamental thing for any editor too is to know Photoshop. You got to know Photoshop, right? Even if you're just creating static titles, you got to know it, right? So I think it goes back to that too, like younger people and AI, I kind of put in the same rate because they're both learning, right? But one thing that we have as humans still, AI hasn't have yet, is that we can do those little fine tuning things very specifically from a prompt from a client. I think it's so important to do. You don't take your shortcuts. Make sure you do things the right way. Make sure you edit in a way that you know someone's going to tear it apart and make you change everything, right? Because Paul, in a perfect world, you would create your first edit as a shell with no B-roll, no color correction, jump cuts. And you tell people, listen to this with your eyes closed and tell me that the story is what you want it to be, right? And then you show them, and the first thing they do, oh, is that a jump cut? It's like, all right, forget it, we're done. They like people, and it's okay. It took me years to come to terms with this. It really did. But you know what? They're not. They need to see B-roll. You got to do some basic color correction. You can't show log footage on your first pass.
Right.
In a professional high-end world, that happens, right? People understand we don't want you to waste your time applying effects and everything else, because then it slows down the edit and you got to disassemble more things. But when you're working with like the average person, the average client, they want to see it you can't just give them a rough cut. You can't give them a shell. It doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. And I think people are used to, like, non-creatives are used to a form of polish. They're used to polish. Yeah. So what happens when everything that you can make is polished? Yeah. Because and it was funny, last year I was going around saying, and I, trying to be Mr. Psychic and predict the future. Sometimes I'm right. A lot of times I'm wrong, but this time I was right. I was like, in 5 years, like good quality is going to be assumed for every creative endeavor. Like, everyone's just going to make great videos. Everyone's going to make great looking, like the quality of the audio, the quality of the video, the quality of the stills, everything's going to look great just because of technological advances. Excuse me. But the one thing that, technology or AI can't replace is craft. Right. And, a computer's never going to know the scenarios unless somebody feeds it that. Yep. And to be able to feed all that nuance, like, I'm sure it's possible. Yeah. It'd probably take a long time to, create a whole bunch of if-then statements, where it's like, if the, should the client do that, whatever. Should the client see this? Or is this a rough cut? Then how's it? What does a rough cut mean? Because a computer doesn't know what a rough cut is. Yeah. So it's only what humans put into it. And like, I love what you said, because I mean, like, with this like the podcast opener, like, the image was generated in Midjourney, then I made the moths in 3D, I animated in After Effects, but it's just a combination of take the available tools that you have, AI, motion design, graphic design, and then blend them all together so it's something new. But the thing is, if you don't know Photoshop or you don't know After Effects and you just know Midjourney, you're kind of handicapped by, like the in painting you could do in Midjourney if there's a blotchy spot or whatever. But that's even limited because you can't control the output. But a designer or an editor, you control the output of what you do. So the computer can only facilitate that. So it only gets you, it gets you, like, you could come up with these amazing images, but then, try controlling AI, even for these episode graphics, I'm generating them using the same seed, so but even that, like, I still have to comp in Photoshop to get the same socket. Well, because even the same light socket. Right. Because even the next step for Midjourney is going to be put those tools into Midjourney, but then still you're going to have to understand, masking and transfer modes and all this kind of stuff. Like those fundamentals, once again, are going to apply to that. You're going to have to know those in order to make very specific requests come through, to make specific edits on things. Right. You can't just like type it in, like, I don't know.
I'm not into it enough. I love it. I've gotten into it. I've started using it for storyboards. I love Midjourney. And if those tools ever get incorporated in there, that'd be great too. I welcome that. But like I said, you're going to have to know what those things are. Like knowing how you would, because you talk to people outside the industry, they have no idea. They don't care. They don't need to know,
Right.
But like, so it's not like it's just like common knowledge. You have to learn this stuff, So go to YouTube U.
And it takes time and like reassessing after making mistakes and stuff. And I think that's never going to get replaced. Like the human element of our ability to mess up and learn from it and reapply, and refine. But I think there's a lot of good things that are coming from this. Cause I mean, looking back on our history, it was almost like an elite club to get into video production. It felt so ethereal and like, it felt so technical. It was like rocket science and all this stuff. And, like there's this Chiron processor that costs so much money, but it's like 30 years old, but it still costs a lot. Like I couldn't understand.
You had to spend years like training to do one thing before they let you touch it, right? You know what I'm saying? Like before you could like fly the plane by yourself, you had to like really get into it. Nowadays it's like, oh, you don't know how to use a camera, just turn it on, hit the button, and you can get by. I don't know.
And so I think that's what the 7D and the 5D did for cinematography. And it was like, you can criticize, the dynamic range of the cameras back then. You could criticize that it was digital because a lot of people still scoffed at digital things instead of film. But you can't deny that it created this whole environment where, I have a little cousin, she's like 7 years old and she's taking these beautiful photos and like, it looks like a photographer did them. And I was like, do you enjoy doing this? And she's like, yeah, I take, it's like my little art thing, my little art projects. I take pictures of a bird or a tree or something. And I'm like, keep doing this. Yeah. So it's awesome because where in the past, you're either a nerd in the AV club, which, I don't even think we had an AV club.
Right.
Or you were after college, if you went to college, you got in with either a news station or some sort of video production company or post house. And if you were really fortunate at the time, or so you thought, you'd work for like ESPN and then get work to the bone. But now we have, I mean, my daughter knows how to take pictures and she's 2.5 years old. She, just swipes on the phone, turns on the app. And then my mom was taking a picture of her, the normal way, dare I say. My daughter got mad, got up, took the phone out of her hand, put it, portrait mode, and then gave it back to her because that's the right way of taking photos. And it hurt. I was proud and so disappointed at the same time because I was like,
fucking vertical frames, Paul.
Yeah, God. Every time I'm like, oh God, what did iPhone do to us?
I hate it. A quick
just
thing
a sign
on
of the times, though.
It is a sign of the time. The thing is that vertical frame drives me nuts. Like it is what it is. I get it. It's because it is shaped like a human body. It's shaped for me to be in that frame or this one person. That I'm not even going to that. It drives me nuts. I get it. It's got a great place. I love when you shoot a project 16:9, everything's said and done, and then say, oh, can we have a vertical version now? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so let's zoom in,
that's somewhere completely different. But once again, like fundamental wise, like if you're shooting a project that's got to do both, right? You can get away with square, right? Like, but if you're shooting a project that's got to do both, it's got to be 16:9 for TV, but we also want to run TikToks or stories. You've got to know that when you're framing it, or you got to shoot it twice, and I'm okay with doing that. It's gotten better now because I think everybody has learned through agonizing processes and edits and blowing up footage and whatever that you can't just assume every frame is going to work both ways, right? So it's and it's implied now, like when we scope a project, it's like, okay, deliverables, is this social? Is it what are we going, website 16:9? Are we going 9:16? Like how are we doing this? So I think we've come a long way. That's a new fundamental process though. In scoping a job is making sure that what the deliverables are going to be. We got to know that up front.
Yeah. But there's no difference between that. I mean, there is a difference, but there's no difference, no fundamental difference between that and then making masters and web versions back in the day.
Yeah, that's true.
Where
That's true.
you would have your master, and then you generate this 640 by 360. If you're like cool enough to do 16 by 9.
Yeah,
Like back
exactly.
then. But I'm still, what about 480? Let's bring that back. Let's put a little postage stamp. But and again, it's just knowing enough of the fundamentals, and it's not your first rodeo where you've been through it before. You're like, oh, I'm going to need this later, or I could need this later. Let me not only making it easy for the client, let's make it easy on me, because somebody's invariably going to ask me to do something that, and that's going to take me a full extra day. Or like, if we know that there's a possibility of shooting 16 by 9, do we want to shoot a little wide, or in 9 by 16? Do we want to shoot a little bit wider?
Yeah.
And then crop in. But then when you crop in, you have to deal with bigger grain, the noise in the image.
Yeah.
So it's like, are we willing to trade that off? Do we have noise reduction techniques later that we can use? Does it even matter? Are people going to, what's the delivery on? Is it going to be a giant screen, or is it going to be a little phone?
Those things matter, man, because they really do. It's like, because first and foremost, someone should be paying for that. If you want perfect sound, perfect framing, perfect color, if you want all that thing to work, someone's got to do that. Someone's got to put that together. That's a part of the project, and it needs to be addressed. And if you can't budget for that, then, you're going to have to be okay with some pixelization or some grain, or you're going to, imperfect audio, And I think you learn some things yourself too. Like which happens a lot, if I'm kind of like shooting, directing, and then, maybe I have like one other person crew, small crew, and I know I'm going to edit it. Like, I know where I can cut corners, right? Like, I know where audio is, I know how well I can fix audio. I know how well I can fix a frame, a color, whatever. I know, if some a little shaky, we have our tricks for that. Maybe shoot at 60p, slow it down, stabilize it. And if you want it full speed, you can go back. All these little secrets you can do. But at the end of the day, though, if you're not shooting for somebody, if you're not shooting for yourself and you're shooting for somebody else, that's where you really got to dig deep into those fundamentals and remember that stuff, because I'll have those moments where someone's like, oh, well, this footage was, I had one guy one time told me this footage is a little, I got everything I need, but some of it was a little weird. And I'm like, well, I would do this or that with it. And he's like, oh, they just don't think of that. Right. So then you've got to really go back and like peel those back a little bit. All of those little things you do that you can fix yourself. You can't do that when you're delivering for somebody else. So you have to have perfect sound. You have to have perfect frames, perfect color, exposure, everything else. And if you're not budgeted to do that, you can't be expected to do it either, right? So you have to kind of build a crew, get those needs out of the way. Because audio, there are fundamentals to recording audio the right way, to lighting the right way. And there, those are, a person is associated with all of those things. So all of these people that do all of these things and are specialized in those things, learn from those people too. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times we have to become a Swiss Army knife, and I don't have a budget for an audio guy. So I try to learn from the audio guys that I know so I can kind of better my own work going forward, right?
Right. Yeah, and the sad truth is you can go your whole career without mastering all the fundamentals. Like every day I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been through the ringer a million times, but I've always known that I'm not the greatest audio editor. And I used to take pride in it. I suck at audio. I'm a video guy. And somebody else would do it. And over the years, it's like, well, you should have a working understanding of how to EQ something properly, right. Or not everyone's always going to be around. And if you want to do something, you shouldn't always have to rely on somebody. It's nice to have, and on a bigger budget client project or a budget, any project with a budget, there should be specialists doing these
right.
tasks and
right.
stuff. But knowing it lets you communicate better to the people that you're dictating to in the future. So if you have to hire an audio guy, you'll at least know what he needs to do his job properly.
Right.
So, which is always like, I think that was the big motivating factor for me, is always try to learn as much about the other professionals as possible so that I can talk to them.
Right.
Because I feel like every, great director is almost a generalist where they kind of understand everything.
100%.
Like,
Yeah, they say like editors make good directors because you know how you're going to put it together later on. So like if I'm on set, if I'm directing, like I know, you should have your boards and everything should be laid out for you, but you still know how this is going to cut to this and how that's going to fit into the overall story, right? Like, but being an editor really helps with that. Shooting really helps with that too. Let people do their jobs, of course, but knowing how they're going to do their jobs or how it's all going to tie together is huge. You need to know all that stuff.
Yeah, editors make the best directors because they're already cranky.
That's true.
They're already
that is so true.
Curmudgeons.
Yeah, man.
I think the principles of what we're talking about don't just apply to video. This can be applied to anything that you do. I mean, so I get here's a question.
Mm-hmm.
How has the increased accessibility of video affected the quality and quantity of it?
Well, I mean, it's affected the quantity, something, obviously pretty, how many videos go up on YouTube every minute? Something crazy like that. So there's plenty of shit out there, right? Like, I think it's a good thing. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're good at what you do, you're going to get work, right? Like some of these younger people that are, YouTubers or, I want to say influencers, but are, really, getting into their own on TikTok with the special effects and some of these guys, I can't think of their names, but they're awesome. And you know what? It doesn't matter that they didn't go to film school or they don't have the huge technical expertise. They do though. Like they're the ones that stand out. And the people that are getting millions of views on every post, they're not just kids that are just getting up, rolling out of bed and flipping on their phone. Those people know what they're doing. They've studied, they're working hard to do it. They're putting in the work every day. Just because they post maybe once a week, some of those videos, took them probably a full week of 20-hour days to do, right? So that's what they're doing. Yeah. And I think that's a great thing because I think at the end of the day, the garbage is going to be the garbage. I don't think I'm competing with people that are, just, filming things on iPhones and doing whatever. Like, I'm not worried about that, and I'm inspired by the people that are out there just learning things on their own and creating and making it happen. And I think a lot of these people are able to do that because, things are accessible because you can shoot an iPhone. You can go on YouTube and watch other people's tutorials and how they did things and build off of that. And then you create your own thing. I think at the end of the day, we talk about fundamentals, but the biggest fundamental is practicing and spending time on it, right? Like, so, you're not going to learn anything if you don't try and you don't put in the time. So I think, there's a lot of garbage out there. And I think, sure, there's going to be plenty of people that are going to posture and every now and then someone's going to come and undercut you in a project. And don't worry about that because when it comes back, they're going to ask you to fix it and you're still going to get paid to do it, right? How many times has that happened? So, so I think it's a good thing overall. I wish when I was younger, it was like this easy. I mean, I can't really complain. I had, my parents had camcorders that we played with and things like that. It was awesome, but like some of the tools now that are pretty affordable, I think it's a great thing for people to have the ability and the accessibility to, to buy things, make things and do their own thing. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's great. There's a lot of garbage out there, but I think it's great.
No, totally. And like, I think the ones like, nobody's perfect from the first time doing anything, so everyone's stuff is garbage, even the most genius person, and it takes time of you refining. And I mean, I look at oh god, it's hidden at this point, but it's an old video of me fighting my buddy with a lightsaber in the Rocky Hill sand pits, and I'm like, wow, because I shot it on a high 8 video camcorder, and then did the visual effects in like After Effects 6 or 7 or something crazy. It's crazy old. And I watched it. I was like, wow, this is trash. And then I rewatched it. And I was like, all right. Little Paulie wanted to, like, I see what you're doing here. So it's looking back on the kind of how far you've come, over the years. And I think that's the most important thing, because nothing's perfect from the get-go anyway. So it's like, screw it, just shoot something or make something and see where it goes.
Yeah.
I think that's the lie we tell ourselves, is that everything that we do, maybe it's because we're Americans, but everything that we do has to be perfect, and it has to make us a lot of money. And
we're afraid of failure, right? It's like, no, it's like, I know, you got to screw up.
But is it failure, or is failure just stopping creating? Is that what failure?
I think
really
that's
is,
ultimately failure, but I think people think something that, you're not proud of, or that, was a pain in the ass or something like that could be a failure. I don't think you've got to go through those things. Like, anybody that's successful in any way or that's made it anywhere is going to tell you that, like, most of the work they've done has been subpar, or not subpar as far as effort goes, but maybe it just didn't come out right,
Right.
So I think that, to your point, like, we expect things to be perfect. We want anything cheap too, right? Cheap and perfect and everything's easy, like that's great. But I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that one.
No, dude, we're like 100% on the same page, though, where it's just like, in order to gain the fundamentals, you have to do things. Like, you could read all the books in the world, but and that's great. Like, I like reading, and I think it's a good supplementary thing. But until you get all your plans, like, destroyed, like, especially on a shoot where everything goes wrong, and you just have to get used to working with that, because if you cling dearly to that, you're gonna lose it.
Something's gonna go wrong. Like, you get to the point where, like, you're supposed to have a shoot day, and like a day before the shoot, like, the big doctor had to cancel, and like 10 years ago that used to be so stressful, like, oh my god, shit. Now you're like, well, okay, I kind of figured that was gonna happen, so when's the next date? You just gotta get with it, just move along. It's just the way it is. And when you're on a set, that's why another fundamental is just to be prepared. Make sure, don't go onto a set not knowing what you want to do. Have your vision laid out, because things are going to go wrong. And if those things can derail the entire shoot, if everything else isn't tidied up and tied in a bow, like, make sure it's all the way you want it to be, because something's going to go wrong. Just make sure it's not something that you could have avoided, right? Just plan for that, and then you'll be all set. And it's easy as that.
Yeah. It almost sounds like there's two things that come to mind. It almost sounds like mastering the fundamentals gives you options.
Yeah.
To make whatever you want, to make things. And it also helps you adapt to, like, situations,
100%.
We have all these tools in our toolbox.
Right. So it's like you're fundamental lighting, right? Like, you want to find a motivating light, but like, oh, well, the sun's not there anymore. Oh, what can we just, I don't know, move around, flip it 180, flip the key, all these different things you can do, because the fundamentals. Like, if you don't know, like, the basic principles of lighting, and then the set you're walking into has a problem, it's going to take you forever to figure out how to redo it. But if you know the fundamentals, like, get a nice key, get a hair light, or set some edge, then you can adapt quickly. Where can we get that key? Where's it coming from? All that. You can get that down, but you have to know, like, what those fundamentals are in order to adapt quickly. Because if you're just kind of shooting from the hip and you're not really put together, when the shit hits the fan, it's gonna show that you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when we first get started, like, in our endeavors, we kind of cling to whatever framework has worked and is taught. And I think one of the biggest mistakes in teaching lighting is telling somebody to start with 3-point lighting.
Yeah.
I think it's the biggest mistake. And I think through 3D, I became a better cinematographer.
Yeah.
Because I understood light better. And it's sometimes, like, one light can work. Sometimes 2 lights can work. Sometimes 6 lights can work. And it's just whatever makes sense for what you're shooting. And you don't know what makes sense until you flip all of them off and turn one on and say, oh, okay, here's the levels here on our key. Here we want a little bit of fill. I kind of want the hair to glow,
Well, and you touched on a good point too, because it's a difference between like knowing your fundamentals and then having things be templated, right? Because if you're just gonna do 3-point lighting for everything, which you can do, but then it becomes a template, and to me, they're very different things. Templates are antithetical to creativity, right? Like templates are something bosses like, because bosses know, oh, just do it this way. We got paid for that. They're looking at the dollar sheets at the end of the day, right? That's cool. Well, we made the same amount of money. Why fix it? It ain't broken. Do the same thing over and over again, which sucks. No one wants to do that. You don't want to templatize your lighting or your editing or anything. You want you maintain those fundamentals to know how things are done, how things should be framed. Is it okay to frame something differently? Is it okay to frame something that used to drive me nuts and still does? Is ESPN was big on this for a while with that framing where someone's kind of like looking off to the side with no lead room. I'm like, cinematically, that's a very telling frame, right? That's telling you that this person's back, there's nothing to look forward to. They've got a lot of baggage behind them. It says a lot of things, but you're just using that to be creative. Like fundamentally, fine, you can do that, but it's just a stupid shot. I'm sorry, I hate it. It's not around. People don't use it as much as they used to, thankfully. It's a terrible shot. Yeah. And that's to me just something that's templatized because it became a template. And then everybody started using it. So now I'm watching all these sports programs. You see them at the bar or something. You don't know what's going on, but you think LeBron's having a bad day, but he's just talking about helping kids. Well, your frame doesn't say that, So don't templatize it.
Is he ashamed?
Yeah.
Ashamed of those kids.
I don't know, man.
No, it's so funny you said that because like it's true. And there's nothing wrong with 3-point lighting if that's the look you're going for. But to introduce newcomers by saying this is the way that it's typically done, here's 3-point lighting. I think it does them a disservice because I think the best way to teach a noob to the industry is say, just turn on one light. What's missing?
Yeah.
And then start filling in the gaps, and then turn on another one. Oh, okay. And then dial your values later. Like if your backlight's too strong, just knock it down.
I think what happens too is a lot of times that third light is like your fill. Like I'm a big, key in a hair light or an edge. And then you get, I find a lot of times that, I have to have that third light and that fill. And now your image is flat. You know what I mean? I'd rather have, and it depends on the client. It depends on the product. It depends on everything else. But then, you flatten that image out and then it's just boring. You know what I mean? So it's like, kill that fill, man. You don't have to have that third layer. Just use a soft bounce. Like there's so many ways to do it. It's not about the same thing with the camera. Who cares how you hold the camera? Who cares what camera you use? As long as the image that's coming out of that camera is what you want it to be or what it should be, then who cares? Same thing with lighting. You don't have to have 3 lights. You don't have to have whatever. Like your lighting should fit the style that you want. And some people don't want to be real. Some people like Tarantino's earlier stuff is just like hot, like not natural. And then you get like Deakins doing Shawshank where people are like, oh, like he didn't even light the damn thing. He's like, fuck, I lit it. It just doesn't look like I lit it, right? Like, which is what I like, I like that natural look. But like, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to use 3-point lighting is what I'm saying. To your point, like you want to know what makes a good image. Obviously light is the most important part of that image, but do it how you have to do it. Figure it out, play with it, don't follow that template of the 3 lighting. Oh, it's 3 lights. Cause then people look for that, it's very frustrating.
It's 100% true, dude. I mean, like,
does it need a fill? Did you look through the monitor? Look at the monitor.
Yeah.
How many times people need to look at the monitor? Hey, if you're on set, look at the monitor. Stop looking at the action from the side, please. Thank you.
Yeah, dude, that's great advice. And I especially like people setting up multiple lights without even looking at the frame first. It's like, look at is the frame even good? And again, you only know by just doing it and seeing what works. And I think lighting in with intent is the only way to light, because if you're just setting stuff up and like turning it on, you're going to be fighting with that forever. And but if you know where there's going to be a key, like if there is even a key, like let's say they're silhouetted and stuff, like just turn on what you think is the primary light of how we should be feeling when we see the scene, and then go from there. Is the person too dark? Then you start adding in fill and stuff. And like I think it's all about messing around and improving. So I'm trying to, and I guess the next thing, like we kind of already covered it, is learning from mistakes and improving. Like
You're gonna mess up. It's gonna happen. Don't be afraid of it. Just own it and fix it, right? Like I think the biggest testament to like where I am now is, like someone I think people can rely on me to get the job done, is because like I did that when I was younger and it was like late on a Friday and I realized, I did a render. It's 5:30. My girlfriend's waiting for me at home. And then, I'm like, it's going to take me an hour or two to fix that graphic. I'll just leave it. Maybe they won't notice, right? Like, don't do that, because someone's going to notice. And even if they don't notice, you didn't put your best work forward, right? So like, fix it, fix your problems, fix other people's problems, and then people will come to you to fix their problems, and then you'll be busy, right? Just fix your problems, learn how to learn from your mistakes, and just own your mistakes, just admit it and fix it.
So yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of stuff, and I think I could talk to you for hours. I mean, as we have in the past, but so tell all of us about this documentary that you made. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man. So we did a 20-minute documentary piece about Brock Pinkerus, and he is he's a 13-year-old dirt track race car driver. And I'll put that in. There's many more terms you can use to describe his car. It's a 18-foot long, 450 horsepower race car that drives around a track with grown men, and he's good. And his father reached out to us because they wanted to kind of put some legitimacy behind his name. He said they feared he was getting a reputation as like a spoiled rich kid who didn't have talent and was just out there playing around with the big guys. But he's not that. He's what do you call it? He's older than his age. He's an old soul, and he's one of the nicest, most mature kids you'll ever meet. And he is just talented behind the wheel. And we got out there and we met Brock and his family, and his dad's a very proud guy, self-made guy. They've got some money, but he's started his own business and he's seen success. And I see a lot of Brock's father in Brock too. So. Just a really good, solid, hardworking family that, wanted to kind of silence some of their critics and also just kind of like legitimize Brock. So we just kind of went in there and followed them around throughout the summer. It turned into something a little bigger than we first thought it would, and followed Brock around through his Rush late model racing tour. Went down to like Maryland and Virginia and all that, and filmed some races and did a bunch of interviews and all that. And yeah, I finally put the final product together. September, I think we let it out. And we just distributed it on YouTube. This is really not for profit. It's just for Brock to get out there, to get Brock's name out there. And we're talking to them. We've got some more stuff to do with the Pinkerus family. They're into this whole thing, and I think they're just interesting, good, honest, authentic people. And I think there's a lot of content that we're probably going to create with them over the next, who knows, couple of years. But that's essentially the documentary, is kind of following Brock around, introducing him, showing kind of behind the scenes of what it's like to be a 13-year-old kid driving a race car.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, after seeing it, I mean, the kid looks legit. Like,
he's awesome. Yeah.
And if he's doing that at 13,
yeah, like
imagine he's going to be like whatever the dirt track version of Joey Logano,
Yeah, but, I just think someone like him he's gonna be fine. He's got a good family, and he's already like he's got it together. He's gonna have a good future, whatever he decides to do. We're all just hoping it's behind the wheel of a race car.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll add a link in the show notes to that, because everyone should watch it.
Thanks, Paul.
Really well done. You guys did a great job, and
thanks.
I mean, I was hooked, and I don't even really watch like racing like that. And I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Well, it was a whole new world for us, because my partner Frank Kelleher and I, like, we that's not really our thing. I think Formula One racing is very cool, but like don't really know much about it. And it's like kind of like anytime you do documentary work, or even you can call some of our corporate videos documentary in a way, but you learn a different kind of like a different culture or lifestyle. So this racing is not just, there's a real culture behind it, and it's a real it's a real thing. So it's kind of cool to be a part of something different. get into that dig yourself and entrench yourself into that world for a while. It's a cool thing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's why we got into this business, to learn other people's stories and make things. You know, it's all part. It makes us more interesting as people.
Absolutely.
You know? At least that's what I hope.
Yeah, I know. Exactly, man.
Oh man. Well, what time is it? It's time to go.
It's time to go, Paul.
we got to do this. We seriously have to do this again, because I want to talk for like 6 more hours, and then I'll have your wife like texting me angrily, like, give me my husband back. Yeah. So thanks everyone for watching. Eric, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having
me. He'll be back to share all of his knowledge and his rants. I love your rants.
I got plenty of them, man.
Than my rants. But we do have to have a podcast after dark one time. Maybe I'll have I'll ship the family off somewhere so I can do a loud, obnoxious booze-filled episode with you. But follow along on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the usual. For feedback, put driven to create podcast at gmail.com. Link is in the show notes, and there will be a link for Eric's doc as well as Eric's personal website, not professional website. It showcases all of his work aside from that documentary. So I think that wraps it up. Bye. Every time I have these awkward outros.
All you gotta do is stare ahead for 5 seconds and you fade out. You're good.